So I've been shooting with the Sony A7 IV for about the last year, and it's been an awesome camera, but I probably use it more as a camera to do videos more than my primary camera, which I use for like landscape photography or just any like photo shoot, and that's the Sony A7C. But the Sony A7 IV is an awesome camera, and the first thing that really sticks out to me is autofocus. So I've used the A7 III, the A7R III, and the A7C, and all three of those cameras have really good autofocus, especially like eye autofocus. But I would say that the A7 IV has the fastest autofocus. There are some issues that I've noticed at times, but they're not as bad as other cameras I've had. And in general, just that's one thing I love about this camera is the autofocus is super fast, really snappy. And then for video, it's just really good. It gets a really good focus and lock on the eyes. And I would say the number one reason to get this camera is if you are interested in autofocus. If you're a wedding photographer, portrait photographer, landscape photographer, you don't need the autofocus as much for landscapes, but it is a great camera. And next up is going to be stabilization. I would say the in-body stabilization is probably just as good as previous cameras like the A7 III or the A7R III. I haven't noticed a huge difference in just taking photos, but for video, this camera is really excellent with active stabilization. I use this anytime I don't have a gimbal, or if I just want to get like a quick shot and use my IBIS as well as the in-body stabilization. It pairs really well. It does a really fantastic job with stabilization because a lot of us don't have gimbals, or you don't want to, maybe you just don't want to carry the extra weight of a gimbal. Well, the A7 IV is awesome because it does a good job. I don't use the gyro data that you can use for stabilization. That is an option with this camera, but in general I just don't use it. I use the active stabilization, and it works just really well in general. I would say if you're using this camera primarily for video, which I would think that most people are, it's going to be right next to the A7S III, and there are a few features on it that are actually better than the A7S III, especially if you're using Sony lenses. So that's another reason why I think this is definitely a camera to get. So here's a preview of the stabilization with active tracked on. I'm walking down some stairs, and I'm going to walk down some more stairs. I'm using the 20mm 1.8. And with this lens, I'm just doing handhold, and all I have is on active track. There's no IBIS, no in-body stabilization whatsoever. And here it is again, I'm walking down some stairs with active track off. This is just the standard in-body camera stabilization. I'm just walking on the beach right now. And here we go again. Now I'm using the 24 to 105mm. I'm walking down some stairs. This is with active track on. And I'm walking on the beach now. This is the 24 to 105 f4 lens. Again, this is with active track off. Walking down the stairs right now with the same 24 to 105mm lens. No active track, and now I'm just walking on the beach. And this is the 20mm 1.8, and this is what it looks like with active track, and this is what it looks like without active track. Without active track. Sorry about that, I kind of lost my audio a little bit, so I decided to go ahead and film at home. But another thing I really like about the A7 IV is the noise. And the reason I got the A7 IV is because I wasn't losing any noise. Now with the A7 III and the A7C, they have the same sensor, so the noise is great. It's not as good as the A7S III, but the A7 IV, I would say the noise is probably pretty close to the A7 III or A7C, and I didn't really notice a huge change when it came to noise. I do a lot of astrophotography, and I didn't really notice any difference at all with the A7 IV compared to the A7 III or A7C. Now I would say the A7R III was a little bit worse in noise overall. And another thing that stands out with this camera is just 10-bit. I know a lot of people love this camera because it has 10-bit, where we didn't have that, just a couple years ago until the A7S III came along. When I first bought the A7 IV, I really wanted the 10-bit because everyone was raving about it so much. But I don't think 10-bit is for me personally because I'm not a professional. I don't do professional work. And even if I did like weddings or other events, I probably wouldn't care to use the 10-bit because I think you can really get by with 8-bit. I don't think 8-bit's that bad. I honestly, I don't even well, a lot of the stuff I don't color grade. I don't use S-Log or anything like that in most of my footage. I have messed around with it a little bit in the past, and I do like slight color grading. And I have noticed like the dynamic range is a little bit better with 10-bit, and you don't have that banding that you see in the skies, which is really nice. But that's not something that you really like notice if you're shooting YouTube or something else. So anyway, those are the things that really stick out to me: autofocus, stabilization, 10-bit, and noise. Those are like the 4 main reasons to buy this camera, right? Now let's talk more about the pros and cons, and we'll go ahead and start with the cons because I already kind of talked about the pros a little bit. So the cons with this camera, first of all, I just think the ergonomics are not really that bad, and I wouldn't say this is a huge con, but if you look at Nikon has been making cameras for years, and to me personally, they have the best ergonomic grip. I really like the design of the camera too. And Sony cameras have really come a long way with ergonomics. And you saw like the previous, the A7 II, or the A7, the A7 II, the A7R II, those all had like this really small grip. But those are actually my favorite looking camera in the A7 series just because they're so small, they're so lightweight. And I know they have this small little grip, but they just look really good. And then we came out with the A7 III and the A7R III, and that grip was much more substantial. And it was like finally they got a grip, but it's still nothing compared to Nikon and Canon. And then with the A7S III and the A7 IV and the A9, we got finally a good ergonomic grip. But in my opinion, it's not the best. The best of the best is Nikon or Canon. Nikon, I think, has the best grip out there. It's just more ergonomic. And the reason I'm talking about this so much is because I'm an ergonomist. I do ergonomics as part of my job. So that's one reason why it kind of sticks out to me. And besides the grip, the ergonomics are pretty good with handling. I feel like the camera and the lens are well balanced for pretty much any of their lenses. Now this isn't so with the A7C because you really can't put huge heavy lenses on it. But with the A7 IV, like Sony just does a really good job with their lenses and making them well balanced. Whereas you may not see this so much with Nikon cameras. So you kind of have to weigh things, but for the most part, this isn't a reason to not go with the Sony. I just kind of think that Nikon has a little bit better grip, and I think that Sony could improve this in the future. Okay, one thing I don't care at all so far with the Sony cameras is the touchscreen. The new menu system is okay, right? It's not phenomenal, it's not life-changing for me. I've been using it for a while, and I'm just used to the older menus because I used them for so long. The new menu is fine. I don't care for the touchscreen, and the reason why I don't activate it or activate it in my previous cameras is because when you tap to focus, or maybe you just accidentally tap on the screen, well, it kind of locks into focus, and then when you start filming yourself, it's still locked onto that focus, and you may not get the shot because, like, if you're looking at the camera, you may just is still maybe locked on that previous focus, and all your shots are out of focus. So I've done some videos in the past where I had to just delete a ton of content because everything was out of focus, and that was just because I just accidentally tapped the screen and I forgot that I did that. And I probably should look right now. Yeah, I'm in focus right now, which is good because I do this all the time. So actually what I ended up doing is I went on the menu system and I disabled the touch screen because it drives me crazy. I still have it enabled in like the playback mode, but it's just kind of annoying because it's this really nice selling feature that they're offering, and I don't care for it at all because they haven't fixed this. Now, one way they could easily fix this, and I don't know if it's possible, I've tried it, it hasn't worked for me so far, is when you do tap to focus, it would be nice if it still at least focused on your eyes, you know, if I'm like filming myself. But when I hit tap to focus, it seems to just focus on that point and it never focuses on me. So that's why I don't like it. And then next up is the menu system. The menu system it's okay. I mean, it's a lot better than it was. I'm just not completely used to it, and I don't really care for the touchscreen all that much. Even if they fix the tap to focus, I would still say that I think that if you're looking for a camera with a really good touchscreen, you should just go with Canon. Go with the Canon RP or the R5 or the R6 or R7. Like any of the new Canon mirrorless cameras are great. They have the best touchscreen. You can change the shutter speed on this touchscreen. You can change the aperture. You can't do that on the Sony. And you can just do everything with the touchscreen, whereas the Sony, you still have to use the manual controls, and that's not a problem because I'm so used to them. But for me, the reason I like Sony is because it has so many custom buttons, and so I just set everything up the way I've always had it, which is so I can just hit the custom button and I don't have to worry about anything. And that's one thing I just love about Sony cameras is I don't have to rely on the menu system because I know how to get to everything with the custom buttons. Okay, so back to the pros. There are two main things that I like about the Sony A7 IV, and I would say those two main things, and the reason why you may consider this camera is, first of all, the autofocus. If you're shooting video, if you're shooting photos, portraits, events, anything with people in it, the autofocus is stellar. It's really good. I wouldn't say it's as good as the A9, but it's pretty close. And you're not going to find much better of a camera on the market that has this good of autofocus. So any of the newer Sony cameras, of course, any of the newer Canon or Nikon cameras are going to have good autofocus, but Sony's just done so well with this in the last few years. I think Sony has some of the best autofocus probably next to Canon. And that's just one reason I want to keep this camera. And I probably will switch it out in the future because of other cameras that have really good stabilization. Now that we have the A7R5 with just incredible in-body image stabilization, it's so much better than it ever was before. It's almost gimbal-like. But the reason why I'm not switching to this camera, and that's the other pro that I want to talk about next, is just stabilization. Sony is just really knocked things out of the park with stabilization. With active stabilization, this camera is pretty close to gimbal-like. As you saw in some of the shots that I did earlier, you can just turn on active stabilization and it does a really good job just walking around. It does have a crop factor in there, but it does a really decent job at keeping things stabilized. It's almost comparable to, I would say, the iPhone 13 or the iPhone 12 or iPhone 11 in regards to stabilization, whereas the A7R5 is more like the iPhone 14 with its newer stabilization, or maybe almost like GoPro quality. It's that good. And the cool thing about the A7R5 is the stabilization it's just the in-body stabilization that's improving. It's not active stabilization like what is inside the Sony A7 IV. It's just their in-body stabilization that's really, it's just remarkable and has improved leaps and bounds from any of their previous cameras. So that's a huge reason why you might want to upgrade to the A7R5. But for the most part, I think the stabilization is great. I don't see a huge reason to upgrade. I wish I had the stabilization on my A7C, and that's one reason why I have kept this camera along. It's the stabilization. Probably more important with this camera than any other camera I've owned, it's the stabilization, because autofocus is good, but for doing video, like what I'm primarily using this camera for right now, the video it's the same as it was in previous cameras. It does track things a lot quicker, but for like doing things like this, just filming me, it's as good as if I was using like an A6000 or A6100 or pretty much any Sony camera in the last 10 years. So the video for autofocus is fine, but if you're doing portraits or events and people, you definitely, this is definitely like a great camera to have that. It's definitely like an all-around camera for most people, for if you're doing weddings, events, landscape photography, because the resolution is so good for landscape photography. And I was shooting on the A7R3 before with 45 megapixels, and I feel like this is just the perfect camera for me because it has the perfect resolution at 36 megapixels, because I don't need that full huge file of 42 megapixels. It does a great job. It does everything. It's great for landscapes, portraits. It's great for content creation, filmmaking. It's a good basic camera that does everything pretty well. And if you want a video focus camera, you go with the A7S III. If you want a portrait focus camera, you go with the A9. But this is a camera that just does everything pretty well. If you're trying to decide on a camera that works best for you, it's not the most budget-friendly camera. And I think if you are looking for a more budget-friendly camera, the A7 III or the A7C is just a really good camera. I've stuck with the A7C because it's just so easy to carry around, and it's so much smaller. And I know it's not that much smaller than this camera, but when I put it in my camera bag, it just seems to be so much smaller, and I just kind of prefer it most of the time. If I'm holding a camera in front of me and I'm doing any video or doing any vlogging, I don't reach for this camera because it's too heavy. So I'll use either the A7C, or I'll just use like an APS-C camera like the A6100. And leave your comments below if you have any thoughts on anything I've said today. I'm interested to hear on what you think about autofocus or the embodied image stabilization with the newer cameras versus the current camera. I'm totally happy with the A7 IV with the stabilization, but I want to hear what you have to say about it. And I hope you enjoy this video. Like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one, and have a great day. Thanks.